On December 14, 1992, at exactly 6:47 a.m., 75-year-old Kaipo Young waved to his neighbor and stepped into his backyard with a bag of birdseed. By 9:30 a.m. he had vanished. His front door hung open. The birdseed lay scattered across the ground. His coffee sat on the kitchen table, still warm. His reading glasses folded beside it. His truck in the driveway. His wallet untouched. No blood. No weapon. No signs of struggle. Just absence. For 31 years, his family lived in hell, not knowing if he suffered, if he died alone, if his body would ever be found. For 31 years, a killer walked free, hiding in plain sight, 3 houses down from where Kaipo took his last breath. And then in 2023, a woman at an estate sale picked up a jade bracelet and recognized an engraving that would crack this case wide open. What she found in that shoebox would lead investigators to a concrete slab, a shallow grave, and a truth so close to home it had been buried under their feet for 3 decades. This is the story of the neighbor who murdered Kaipo Young and almost got away with it. Before we dive into this haunting mystery, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Let's see how far across the world Kaipo's story reaches today. Kaipo Young was born in 1917 on the Big Island of Hawaii, in the small district of Puna, a place where the air smells like plumeria and volcanic earth, where neighbors know your grandmother's maiden name, where life moves to the rhythm of roosters crowing at dawn. He spent 40 years working the sugarcane fields, his hands calloused and strong, his back bent by honest labor. He married his sweetheart, Mele, in 1941, just months before Pearl Harbor changed everything. They raised 3 children in a modest plantation house, 2 sons and a daughter who adored him. When Mele died in 1984 after a long battle with cancer, something in Kaipo dimmed. But he didn't collapse. He found purpose in small rituals. Every morning at dawn, without fail, he would step onto his lanai, a covered porch, with a bag of birdseed. He'd scatter it across the yard and watch the doves, the finches, the bright red honey creepers descend in a flutter of wings. He'd water his plumeria trees, the ones Mele had planted decades ago. He'd pour himself a cup of strong Kona coffee and sit in his chair, watching the sunrise bleed gold and orange over the silhouette of Mauna Loa. He loved the simple things, his daughter later told investigators. Birds, coffee, sunrise. He didn't need much to be happy. Kaipo lived alone but wasn't lonely. His children called every Sunday without fail. His neighbors checked on him. He drove himself to the grocery store in Hilo once a week, attended church on Sundays, played cards with friends on Thursday nights. At 75 he was sharp, healthy, independent. He took no medications beyond vitamins. His doctor said he'd live to 90 easy. But in the months before he vanished, something changed. Small things started disappearing from his property. A toolbox he kept in the carport. A transistor radio from the lanai. His late wife's jade bracelet, the one engraved with, "To Mele Forever KY." Gone from the bedroom dresser where it had sat untouched for 8 years. Kaipo mentioned it to his daughter 3 weeks before he disappeared. "Dad said things were going missing," she recalled, her voice breaking. "He said he thought he knew who it was. Someone close by. But he didn't want to cause trouble. He said he'd handle it quietly the old-fashioned way, talk to the person man to man, work it out without police. That decision would cost him his life." The Puna district where Kaipo lived was rural, dirt roads, houses spaced far apart, thick jungle vegetation between properties. His street was a dead end. Only 7 houses. Everyone knew everyone. And 3 houses down lived a man named Thomas Brandt. December 14, 1992, started like every other Monday morning in Kaipo Young's quiet, predictable life. 6:47 a.m., Dennis Kikoa, Kaipo's neighbor directly across the fence line, steps outside to start his truck. He sees Kaipo emerge from his house carrying a canvas bag of birdseed. They wave to each other, the same casual morning greeting they'd exchanged 1,000 times. Kaipo smiles. Dennis drives off to his job at a warehouse in Hilo, 30 miles away. 7:15 a.m., another neighbor, an elderly woman named Clara Mehalana, hears the distinct sound of Kaipo's truck engine starting. It runs for maybe 60 seconds then shuts off. She assumes he's moving it to wash it, something he did every Monday morning like clockwork. She thinks nothing of it. 8:30 a.m., the mail carrier Eddie Nakamura delivers mail to Kaipo's box at the end of the driveway. He glances toward the house. The front door is closed. Kaipo's truck sits in the carport. Everything appears normal. Eddie moves on to the next address. 9:30 a.m., Kaipo's daughter, living in Honolulu on the island of Oahu, makes her routine Monday morning phone call. She dials her father's number. It rings. No answer. She's not worried yet. Sometimes he's in the back garden, out of earshot, pulling weeds or trimming his plumeria trees. 10:45 a.m., she tries again. Still no answer. A small knot of concern forms in her stomach. 11:45 a.m., third call. No answer. Now she's worried. Her father never ignores the phone for this long. She calls Dennis Kikoa's house. His wife answers. Dennis is at work, but she promises to have him check on Kaipo when he gets home. 12:30 p.m., Dennis returns home for lunch, a habit he kept to save money. His wife relays the message. Dennis walks across the yard to Kaipo's house, calling out as he approaches. No response. He reaches the front door. It's open. Not wide open, just ajar about 6 inches. Kaipo. Dennis calls. Uncle Kaipo, you okay? Silence. He pushes the door open and steps inside. The living room is undisturbed. The kitchen is tidy. But there, on the linoleum floor near the back door, is the canvas bag of birdseed, torn open, seeds scattered in a wide arc across the floor and out into the yard. Kaipo's reading glasses sit folded on the kitchen table. Beside them, a coffee mug half full, still faintly warm to the touch. His wallet lies on the counter. His keys hang on the hook by the door. Dennis's heart starts pounding. He walks through the house, calling Kaipo's name. Bedroom, empty. Bathroom, empty. Back porch, empty. 1:20 p.m., Dennis calls 911. 2:05 p.m., Officer Kimo Alvarez arrives. He's a 12-year veteran of the Hawaii County Police, seen plenty of missing elder cases, usually Alzheimer's patients who wander off confused. But as he walks through Kaipo's house, something feels wrong. This isn't the scene of a confused man wandering away. There's no medical emergency. No signs of a fall. No indication of disorientation. The spilled birdseed suggests interruption. Sudden. Unexpected. Officer Alvarez steps into the backyard and scans the perimeter. The vegetation is thick, ohia trees, ferns, wild ginger. But there's no path of disturbed foliage. No sign someone walked into the jungle. He keys his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need detectives and a search team at this location. Possible abduction or foul play. Subject is a 75-year-old male, last confirmed sighting approximately 7 hours ago. No signs of voluntary departure. The words hang in the humid afternoon air. Kaipo Young had vanished. By 4 p.m. that same day, Kaipo Young's disappearance had become a full-scale emergency. Hawaii County Police deployed K-9 units, search and rescue teams, and volunteers from the Puna community. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras circled overhead, scanning the dense ohia forest that sprawled for miles in every direction. Divers were dispatched to nearby tide pools and lava tubes, natural volcanic caves where a body could disappear forever. The terrain was brutal. Jagged black lava rock, sharp enough to slice through boots. Thick undergrowth that swallowed light. Sections of forest so dense the search teams had to hack through with machetes. Detective Lani Makoa, a 15-year veteran born and raised on the Big Island, took lead on the investigation. She knew Kaipo personally, had seen him at community barbecues, church fundraisers, the farmers market in Hilo. This wasn't just another case file. This was a man she'd waved to in parking lots. She stood in his kitchen that first evening, staring at the spilled birdseed, the warm coffee, the reading glasses. This wasn't a heart attack, she said to her partner. This wasn't a man who wandered off confused. Something happened here. Something fast. The first 48 hours were a blur of organized chaos. Bloodhounds picked up Kaipo's scent in the backyard but lost it at the property line, suggesting he either got into a vehicle or was carried. Search grids were established. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the jungle, calling Kaipo's name into the silence. By Tuesday morning, Kaipo's 3 children had flown in from Oahu. His daughter, pale and hollow-eyed, gave a press conference. Our father is a kind man. He has no enemies. He doesn't owe anyone money. He doesn't have dementia. Someone took him. Someone knows where he is. Please, if you know anything, call the police. Her voice cracked on the last word. The community responded with overwhelming support. Flyers were printed and distributed, Kaipo's smiling face staring out from telephone poles, grocery store bulletin boards, post office walls. Candlelight vigils were held. Strangers brought food to the family. But as Tuesday became Wednesday and Wednesday became Thursday, hope began to curdle into dread. No body. No witnesses beyond Dennis Kikoa's 6:47 a.m. wave. No ransom call. No confession. Detective Makoa interviewed every neighbor on the dead-end street. Everyone loved Kaipo. No one had heard anything unusual that morning. No screams. No vehicles speeding away. One neighbor, a man named Thomas Brandt who lived 3 houses down, told Makoa he'd been asleep until noon that day. Didn't hear anything. Didn't see anything. Seemed nervous, but then again most people are nervous talking to detectives. Makoa noted his name in her file and moved on. By Sunday, December 20th, 6 days after Kaipo vanished, the search efforts began to scale back. The jungle had swallowed him whole. Or so it seemed. In a place like Puna, where everyone knows everyone, where your business is everyone's business, Kaipo Young's disappearance became a wound that wouldn't heal. Neighbors who'd waved to each other for decades now eyed each other with suspicion. The phrase Kaipo's daughter had mentioned, someone close by, echoed in whispered conversations at the grocery store, at the gas station, the post office. Who had Kaipo suspected? Some pointed fingers at transient workers who'd been camping illegally in the forest near the highway. Others whispered about family disputes. Maybe one of his children needed money, maybe there was an inheritance conflict no one knew about. Dennis Kikoa, the neighbor who'd found the scene, became a subject of quiet speculation simply because he was the last known person to see Kaipo alive. It didn't matter that Dennis had a rock-solid alibi, time-stamped punch card at the warehouse in Hilo, confirmed by his supervisor and a dozen co-workers. Suspicion doesn't require evidence. It just requires proximity. Dennis stopped attending community gatherings. The weight of unspoken accusations drove him into isolation. By February 1993, the case had faded from local news headlines. By summer, organized search efforts had stopped entirely. Kaipo's children returned to Oahu, leaving behind flyers that curled and faded in the tropical sun. The Puna community tried to move on, but the unease remained. People locked doors they'd never locked before. Parents warned children not to wander into the jungle. Elderly residents asked family members to install security lights. Thomas Brandt, the reclusive neighbor 3 houses down, kept to himself as always. He was odd, everyone agreed on that, but odd wasn't criminal. He mowed his lawn irregularly, didn't attend community events, sometimes shouted at kids who rode bikes too close to his property. But he'd been interviewed by police and cleared. He had no reason to hurt Kaipo. No known conflict. So life, slowly and painfully, returned to a fragile version of normal. Except for Detective Lani Makoa. She couldn't let it go. Every December 14th, she pulled Kaipo's file from the cold case archive and reviewed her notes, searching for the details she'd missed, the questions she hadn't asked, the connections she'd failed to make. The spilled birdseed haunted her dreams. The open door. The warm coffee. The reading glasses folded neatly on the table, as if Kaipo had every intention of returning in just a moment. Where did he go? And who made sure he'd never come back? Detective Lani Makoa carried Kaipo Young with her for 31 years. In 1993 she chased every lead no matter how thin. She re-interviewed neighbors multiple times, searching for inconsistencies in their statements. She studied Kaipo's finances. No suspicious withdrawals, no debts, no gambling problems. She examined the stolen items angle, the detail that gnawed at her. Kaipo had suspected someone of theft and planned to confront them. But without a body, without physical evidence, without witnesses, she was building theories on air. In 1996, Makoa was promoted to the homicide division. Her desk filled with new cases, domestic violence murders, drug-related shootings, the grim machinery of human violence that never stops. But Kaipo's file stayed in the corner of her desk, a constant reminder. Every December 14th became a ritual. She'd pull the file, spread the photographs across her desk. The spilled birdseed. The open door. Kaipo's smiling face from his driver's license. She'd review her notes, looking for patterns, connections, the thread she'd somehow missed. In 2000, Kaipo's daughter stopped calling for updates. Hope had curdled into resignation. The weekly phone calls that had once kept Makoa accountable, any news? Anything at all? Simply stopped. In 2005, Makoa attended Kaipo's memorial service. After 7 years, Hawaiian law allowed the family to declare him legally dead. His children scattered his ashes, or rather ashes meant to represent him, over the ocean near Hilo Bay. Makoa stood in the back of the ceremony, watching Kaipo's daughter weep as she poured the ashes into the waves. The guilt was crushing. She'd failed him. Failed to find his body. Failed to bring anyone to justice. The years blurred. Cold case reviews yielded nothing. DNA technology improved dramatically, but there was no biological evidence to test. No blood. No hair. No fibers. In 2018, now a sergeant, Makoa trained a young detective fresh out of the academy. She told her, "Cold cases will haunt you if you let them. You have to learn to compartmentalize to move on, or they'll eat you alive." But she couldn't follow her own advice. The image of that spilled birdseed never left her. By 2022, approaching retirement, Makoa had accepted she'd never solve it. Kaipo Young would be her ghost, the one that got away, the failure that defined her career despite dozens of successfully closed cases. She planned to retire in August 2023. And then, in March of that year, her phone rang with news that would change everything. A woman had found something at an estate sale. Something that belonged to Kaipo Young. After 31 years, the ghost was about to speak. March 18, 2023. Patricia Lee, a 62-year-old vintage collector and longtime Puna resident, was browsing an estate sale in Hilo. The homeowner, Thomas Brandt, age 68, had died of a heart attack 3 months earlier. No surviving family. No will. His modest estate was being liquidated by the county. Patricia moved through the crowded garage, sifting through boxes of old tools, dusty books, tarnished silverware. Estate sales were her weekend ritual. She loved the archaeology of it, piecing together a stranger's life through their abandoned possessions. She opened a shoebox filled with costume jewelry, tangled necklaces, cheap bracelets, and then, something that made her stop. A jade bracelet. Delicate. Clearly expensive. Clearly old. She turned it over. Engraved on the inside, "To Mele forever KY." Patricia's breath caught. She'd lived in Puna for 40 years. She remembered the Kaipo Young case. Everyone did. It was the ghost story of the community, the old man who vanished feeding birds, never found, never explained. Mele was Kaipo's late wife. KY was Kaipo Young. Patricia's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and called the Hawaii County Police non-emergency line. "I'm at an estate sale," she said, her voice shaking. "I think I just found evidence from a cold case." Within an hour, Detective Sergeant Lonnie Makoa was standing in Thomas Brandt's garage, staring at the jade bracelet in an evidence bag. Kaipo's daughter confirmed it through photographs sent to her phone. "That's my mother's bracelet. She wore it every day until she died. My father kept it on her dresser after she passed. He told me it went missing a few weeks before he disappeared. But the bracelet wasn't the only thing." Makoa and her team tore through the estate with surgical precision. In the garage, a toolbox with the initials KY carved into the wooden handle. In a storage bin, a transistor radio with a serial number that matched the one Kaipo had reported missing to his daughter. On a shelf in the bedroom, a small jade statue that Kaipo's children didn't even realize had been stolen. 4 items. All belonging to Kaipo Young. All in the possession of Thomas Brandt. Makoa felt 31 years of frustration crystallize into clarity. Thomas Brandt had lived 3 houses down from Kaipo Young in 1992. Thomas Brandt had been interviewed during the initial investigation and dismissed. Thomas Brandt had been sitting on evidence for 3 decades. Makoa pulled Brandt's original interview file from 1992. He told investigators he was asleep until noon on December 14th. No alibi. No corroboration. "Run a full background check on Thomas Brandt," Makoa ordered. "Everything. Criminal history, employment, known associates. And get me a warrant to search the property where he lived in 1992. The ghost was about to be exhumed. Thomas Brandt was a ghost himself. A man who existed in the margins, noticed but not known. Born in Reno, Nevada in 1954, Brandt had a criminal record that painted a disturbing picture. In 1982 he was arrested for burglary, breaking into an elderly neighbor's home and stealing jewelry while the victim was hospitalized. He served 3 years in Nevada State Prison. In 1987 he was arrested again, this time for assault. He'd beaten a coworker with a tire iron during an argument over a parking space. Charges were reduced to misdemeanor battery. He served 6 months. In 1989, Brandt left Nevada and moved to Hawaii's Big Island. No clear reason. No job waiting. He rented a small house on a dead-end road in Puna from a mainland investor who never visited the property. Neighbors remembered him as odd, reclusive, volatile. He didn't work, seemed to survive on disability checks. He mowed his lawn irregularly, let his property deteriorate, shouted at children who rode bikes too close to his fence. But his criminal history wasn't public knowledge in Puna. In 1992 there was no Google. No easy way for neighbors to run background checks. Brandt was just the weird guy 3 houses down. Then in late 1992, Kaipo Young noticed items missing from his property. A newly discovered witness, the widow of Brandt's now-deceased landlord, gave investigators a statement in April 2023 that changed everything. Kaipo came to my husband in November 1992, the widow recalled. He said things were going missing from his property. He suspected Thomas Brandt but didn't want to call the police. Kaipo was old school, didn't like making waves. He asked my husband if Brandt had a key to his property, thinking maybe Brandt was borrowing things by mistake. My husband told him no. But he did tell me later that Kaipo had gone to Brandt's house to talk to him directly. She paused, her eyes distant. A few days later, Brandt showed up at our door ranting. He was furious. Said, that old man had accused him of being a thief, threatened to call the cops, tried to ruin his life. My husband told him to calm down. Brandt said, he has no idea who he's messing with. 3 weeks later, Kaipo vanished. Detective Makoa felt the pieces lock into place. Motive, Brandt feared exposure of his criminal past. Feared arrest. Feared being sent back to prison or deported back to the mainland. Opportunity, Brandt lived 3 houses away. He had no job, no schedule, complete freedom of movement. Means, Brandt was 37 years old in 1992, physically capable. Kaipo was 75, frail by comparison. And critically, Brandt had been interviewed in December 1992 and dismissed. Makoa pulled the original interview transcript. The detective who'd spoken to Brandt had asked, did you see or hear anything unusual on the morning of December 14th? Brandt's answer, no. I was asleep until noon. No follow-up. No verification. No deeper questioning. In 1992, investigators were focused on finding a lost elderly man, not investigating a murder. They'd been looking in the wrong direction. And Thomas Brandt had watched them search, knowing exactly where Kaipo Young was buried. April 12, 2023. The property where Thomas Brandt lived in 1992 was now owned by a couple who'd purchased it in 2005. They had no connection to Brandt, no knowledge of the history. When police arrived with a search warrant, they were horrified. We've lived here for 18 years, the wife said, her voice shaking. You're telling me there might be a body under our yard? Detective Makoa nodded grimly. That's what we're here to find out. The scene was methodical, almost surgical. Ground-penetrating radar teams set up equipment, scanning the soil for density anomalies. Cadaver dogs, German shepherds trained to detect decomposition, swept the property in careful grids. The backyard was overgrown, wild ginger, ferns, guava trees. But in the northeast corner, partially hidden by vegetation, was a concrete slab approximately 8 feet by 6 feet. According to county building permits, Thomas Brandt had poured that slab in February 1993, 2 months after Kaipo vanished. The permit application listed it as a shed foundation. No shed was ever built. The cadaver dog alerted at the northeast corner of the slab. Saturday. What? Scratched at the concrete. The handler turned to Makoa. She's got something. Forensic teams moved in. They used jackhammers to break the concrete carefully, section by section. The work was painstaking. If remains were present, they needed to be preserved for evidence. By late afternoon, the concrete was cleared. Beneath it, compressed soil darker than the surrounding earth. Excavation began. 4 feet down, a trowel struck something solid. Bone. The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Elena Cortez, flown in from Honolulu, knelt in the dirt. She used a small brush to clear soil from the object. A femur. Human. Adult. Over the next 6 hours, the team carefully excavated the remains. The skeleton was incomplete, scattered by decomposition, soil pressure, and time. But enough was present. Skull, ribs, long bones, fragments of vertebrae. Dr. Cortez examined the skull under portable lighting. Blunt force trauma, she said quietly. Multiple impacts to the left parietal bone. This person was struck at least 3 times with a heavy object. Detective Makoa stood at the edge of the excavation site, watching soil being brushed from bones that had been hidden for 31 years. Media trucks lined the street. Satellite dishes extended toward the sky. The story had broken. Cold case remains found in Big Island backyard. Kaipo Young's children were notified. They didn't come to the scene. His daughter later said she couldn't bear to see her father reduced to bones in the dirt. That night, Makoa sat in her car outside the property, staring at the excavation tent illuminated by work lights. Kaipo had been 30 feet from his own home, buried under his neighbor's concrete. For 31 years. May 8, 2023. The remains were confirmed through dental records. Kaipo Young. The medical examiner's report was devastating in its clinical precision. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull. 3 distinct impact points on the left parietal bone, consistent with being struck by a heavy, flat object. Possibly a shovel, possibly the stolen toolbox that was never recovered. The fracture patterns indicated the blows came from behind and slightly to the left. Kaipo likely never saw it coming. No defensive wounds on the hand bones. No fractures suggesting he raised his arms to protect himself. It was fast, brutal, final. Among the remains, fragments of fabric, a plaid shirt, denim jeans. Kaipo's daughter confirmed through old photographs that her father had been wearing those exact clothes the morning he disappeared. Investigators reconstructed the timeline. December 14, 1992, sometime between 6:47 a.m. and 8:30 a.m., Thomas Brandt confronted Kaipo Young in his backyard, likely as Kaipo was scattering birdseed. An argument escalated. Brandt, enraged at being accused of theft, grabbed a weapon and struck Kaipo from behind. Kaipo died instantly or within minutes. Brandt panicked. He dragged or carried Kaipo's body the short distance to his own property, approximately 200 feet through the vegetation separating the two houses. He buried the body quickly, shallow, in his backyard. In February 1993, Brandt poured concrete over the grave, ostensibly for a shed foundation, but truly to seal Kaipo beneath stone forever. The stolen items, kept as trophies? Or simply because Brandt felt entitled after committing murder? Dr. Cortez, the forensic anthropologist, offered her professional assessment. In my experience, killers who keep victims' possessions are often narcissistic. They feel ownership. They believe they've won. Keeping Kaipo's bracelet, his tools, his radio, it was Brandt's way of asserting dominance even after death. But Thomas Brandt would never face trial. He died in December 2022, 3 months before Patricia Lee found the bracelet. Heart attack. Age 68. Alone in his Hilo apartment. He'd lived 30 years and 2 months after murdering Kaipo Young. He'd walked free, eaten meals, watched sunsets, slept peacefully, while Kaipo's family lived in hell. Detective Makoa stood in the cold case office, staring at Brandt's mugshot from his 1987 Nevada arrest. "You almost got away with it," she whispered. Almost. June 3, 2023. Kaipo Young's children, now 73, 68, and 66 years old, stood before a bank of news cameras and microphones in a Hilo press room. His daughter, the one who'd called that December morning in 1992, read a prepared statement. Her hands shook. Her voice cracked every few words. "For 31 years our family has lived in a nightmare. Not knowing where our father was. Not knowing if he suffered. Not knowing if we could have prevented this. We've grieved him twice, once when he vanished and again now learning the truth." She paused, wiping tears. "Our father was a good man. He loved birds and sunrises and his family. He deserved to grow old peacefully. Instead, he was murdered by a neighbor who couldn't stand being held accountable for theft. And that man lived free for 3 decades while we suffered." The oldest son, his face carved with grief and rage, leaned toward the microphone. "Thomas Brandt died before we could see him in handcuffs. Before we could hear him confess. Before we could ask him why. That's something we'll carry forever. But at least now we can bury our father. At least now we know." On June 17, 2023, Kaipo Young was finally laid to rest beside his wife, Mele, in a cemetery overlooking Hilo Bay. Hundreds attended. Neighbors from Puna. Detectives who'd worked the case. Strangers who'd followed the story and felt compelled to pay respects. Dennis Kikoa, the neighbor who'd waved to Kaipo that last morning, stood at the graveside weeping. "I saw him alive," he whispered. "I was probably one of the last people. And Brandt was right there too, watching, planning. I've replayed that morning in my head 10,000 times." The family's reckoning was complex. Kaipo's daughter entered therapy to process what she called delayed grief, mourning not just her father's death, but the decades of not knowing. One son found peace through faith, returning to the church, believing his father was finally at rest. The other son channeled his rage into victims' rights advocacy, lobbying for legislation to mandate background checks for renters in close proximity housing. Closure, they learned, wasn't a moment. It was a process. Painful. Ongoing. Imperfect. "People ask if we feel better now that we know," the daughter said in a later interview. "The truth is we feel everything. Relief. Rage. Sadness. Exhaustion. Knowing the truth doesn't erase 31 years of hell. It just gives us permission to finally stop wondering." At the funeral, they placed a photo of Kaipo beside the casket. He was smiling, holding a bag of birdseed, surrounded by doves. The way he should be remembered. Not as bones in the dirt, but as a man who loved simple, beautiful things. The Kaipo Young case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about silence, suspicion, and the fragile line between peace and danger. Kaipo knew someone was stealing from him. He suspected Thomas Brandt. But rather than call the police, he chose the path of his generation. Handle it quietly, man to man, avoid conflict, preserve community harmony. That choice cost him his life. It's easy to say he should have called the authorities. But Kaipo came from a culture and era that valued discretion, respect, indirect confrontation. He didn't want to ruin Brandt's life over stolen items. He believed in second chances and talking things out. He had no way of knowing Brandt was a violent felon with a history of brutality. This case is also a story about investigative tunnel vision. In 1992, police were looking for a lost elderly man. They conducted wellness checks. They assumed medical emergency or disorientation. They interviewed Brandt and accepted his answer, "I was asleep," without deeper scrutiny. Why? Because he was a neighbor. Because missing persons cases involving the elderly rarely involve homicide. Because they had no body, no evidence, no reason to suspect murder. Brandt slipped through because investigators were answering the wrong question. It's also a story about how time doesn't erase guilt. Thomas Brandt kept Kaipo's possessions for 31 years. The jade bracelet, the toolbox, the radio. What? Did he forget they were there? Did he wear them as trophies, reminders of the power he'd wielded? Or did some part of him, buried deep beneath narcissism and rage, want to be caught? We'll never know. But those kept items became his undoing. If you're watching this and something feels wrong in your neighborhood, if items are disappearing, if someone makes you uneasy, if your instincts scream danger, trust them. Make the call. File the report. Don't suffer in silence to preserve peace. Kaipo Young tried to handle it quietly. And for 31 years his family paid the price. Justice delayed is justice denied. But in this case, justice finally arrived, carried on the wings of a jade bracelet found in a shoebox at an estate sale. Kaipo's voice, silent for 3 decades, finally spoke. And the truth, patient and relentless, shattered the concrete that tried to bury it. Every morning the sun still rises over Mauna Loa. Gold light spills across the volcanic slopes, indifferent to human tragedy, indifferent to the violence that stole Kaipo Young from the world 31 years ago. But on the property where Kaipo once lived, now owned by his granddaughter who moved there in 2024, there's a memorial bench facing east toward the dawn. The plaque reads, Kaipo Young, 1917 to 1992. He loved the birds and the sunrise. Taken too soon, remembered always. Visitors leave offerings. Birdseed scattered at the base. Plumeria flowers, the kind Kaipo grew. Small stones in the Hawaiian tradition of remembrance. His grandchildren bring their children to sit on the bench and tell stories about the great-grandfather they never met, the man who worked the sugarcane fields, who loved his wife fiercely, who found joy in simple rituals. He deserved better, the granddaughter says. But at least now, people remember him for who he was, not just how he died. The birds still come. Doves and finches and the bright red honey creepers Kaipo adored. They have no memory of what happened in that backyard in December 1992. But the people do. And they've made certain Kaipo Young's name won't be forgotten, not erased by time, not buried beneath concrete, not silenced by the evil that thought it could hide forever. Detective Lani Makoa, now retired, visits the bench once a year on December 14th. She brings a bag of birdseed and scatters it across the yard. "You can rest now," she whispers. "And so can I." At her retirement ceremony in August 2023, Makoa said something that still echoes. In the end, truth is patient. It waits in the earth, in the evidence, in the hearts of those who refuse to give up. And when it finally surfaces, it shatters the silence. Kaipo Young waited 31 years. But the truth finally came. And the sunrise he loved, the one Thomas Brandt tried to steal forever, still paints the sky gold every morning. A reminder that light always returns. Even after the darkest night. If this story moved you, honor Kaipo's memory by hitting that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who believes justice matters, no matter how long it takes. And in the comments, tell us, what cold case do you want us to investigate next?